Everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Zach Boren. I'm a senior vice president here at Apprenticeships for America. I'd like to just take a minute to stage the conversation around today, this pay for success model, why it matters so much now, and especially for American manufacturing. A lot of us are feeling, and reading the news about how, the labor market is frozen. Those that are, intermediaries and apprenticeship professionals that are interacting with employers saying they still can't find skilled workers, a lot of those in the trades. And workers on the other side are feeling that jobs are out of reach. So for manufacturers, especially small, mid-sized, the challenge feels even sharper. And I think we're going to dive into some of those challenges today, especially for small companies where they don't have training departments or excess capital, and they don't have the time to wait for talent to show up fully trained. And that's really why, apprenticeships matter and this dialogue matters today. So just to kind of set us in the ground and some real examples, a couple of years ago, I was working with a company called Swiss Chrono. They're a floor manufacturer. They're in Barnwell, South Carolina. They are a foreign company, so they're actually Swiss-born, but they have locations here in the U.S. And they were used to the apprenticeship model, and sort of struggling for that role, and not really how to put it all together. So they wanted to move into IT. And while I was at the Urban Institute as an intermediary, we were able to jump in and support them with funding from philanthropy to get them started. We helped them design that apprenticeship program and launch it pretty quickly in IT. And then, hey, after that, we're off to the races. They were on to building another apprenticeship, and that time was for robotics. But here's why I tell that story is this funding that's coming out around pay for success really does require intermediaries to do their work in engaging employers, getting them involved, doing that design and setup work. And like most manufacturers, they're going to rely on you all, on intermediaries, on apprenticeship professionals for that design, registration, the coordination, aligning funding. And that's really what we're going to dive into is this really good idea that's turning into a scalable business strategy. So that really brings us full circle to what we're going to talk about today. The Department of Labor has announced in the last few months the American Manufacturing Apprenticeship Incentive Fund. That is a lot of words for a big announcement. But we're excited about it. It's going to be led by the state of Arkansas. So we're going to talk with folks from Arkansas today that have been knee deep in the launch of this, which just launched just yesterday. So it's a national outcomes driven approach designed for manufacturers. It uses the pay for success model that we talked about last week, some. In that $145 million announcement that the department made. This time, we're going to be talking about how it works in manufacturing and to encourage employers to create, expand, and join registered apprenticeship programs. So, in this model, instead of paying for pilots or plans, this model focuses in on results, and that's apprentices hired and retained in manufacturing in a variety of fields. So we're going to talk with Cody Waits and Lonnie Emard today. Cody Waits is the executive director of the Arkansas Office of Skills Development, who's leading this work on the American Manufacturing Incentive Fund, funded through the U.S. Department of Labor and the Office of Apprenticeship. And secondly, we're going to welcome Lonnie Emard. Actually, we're going to introduce Lonnie first, and he's the National Apprenticeship Director with Apprenticely and a longtime friend. I've worked with Lonnie for more than a decade on a variety of topics. When I was at the U.S. Department of Labor, he was at Blue Cross Blue Shield. building tech apprenticeships for the insurance industry. So glad to see you all. Thank you, Cody, for being on with us today. I know we have a lot of folks that are excited. We've gotten a ton of emails on this topic. Lonnie, if I could maybe start with you to give us a little bit of context, and then I'm going to move to Cody to give us the kind of the meat and potatoes of the project, and then we'll go in and we'll dive a little bit deeper. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A. But everyone who's on here today, feel free to kind of jump in the chat as you're ready and have questions, and we'll queue those questions up as well. So, Lonnie.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. This group that joins AFA is a wonderful collaborative environment. So thank you, and Cody and I are both excited to cover kind of this opening scene setting, if you will. I think the best context I can provide is that, having done apprenticeships, as you mentioned, for a long time, when I came to Arkansas, first kind of consulting with the state of Arkansas, they had gotten a $6 million, grant that introduced me to Cody, and then eventually introduced me to Charles Morgan and Bill Yoder, who were heading up a nonprofit at the time called the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences. We had the wonderful opportunity to have OSD and Cody kind of fund an end-to-end model that really was my vision for many years about what does it take to really scale apprenticeships. And so that was the genesis of what we started back in 2019. And I say that because as we talk about pay for success, once we established credibility in IT, cyber, and data analytics, it quickly became obvious that as we were talking to employers every day about demand, right, about skills based, and we were talking to talent every day, right, Arkansans from all walks of life. What we put together as an intermediary was something that took every burden away from employers, right? That they could focus on, do I have the right person in the right job, getting productive, trained to be skilled, and staying, right? And about 3 years in, right, we were doing pretty well. And you probably remember that, pretty well in this IT space. And I think we realized that what we were doing was agnostic to the sector and the occupation. And so whether that was because of a big employer partner that we had, Walmart, or because we were looking to the Governor Sanders to say, hey, if you can do it in IT, why can't you do it in healthcare and manufacturing and energy and so forth? And Cody was right there to support us. And we actually submitted a potential contract that was a pay for performance model to the Department of Labor, to John Ladd and Megan. And and we were told, wait for the ABA. Wait for the ABA. That was the first one. It was coming out. It was a hub model, and it was going to give us an opportunity to kind of deploy our model of a pay for performance or pay for success. And Cody was our biggest supporter because they were already funding a base level of funding for us as an organization, and we were then using funding to deliver all kinds of apprenticeships, mostly covering the cost of RTI, the related technical instruction, in a very braided model, right, between federal funding, state funding that OSD provided, and even some philanthropy money, right, from foundations. That's why we were set up as a nonprofit to do that. Now, what was so important about this outcome-based funding is we thought it would really become important for employers because it was going to be based on results that they cared about. It wasn't going to be based on anything except somebody in a seat becoming productive, right? Apprenticeships start with employers, them hiring someone or promoting someone, right? Let's don't forget about incumbent workers advancing. And so I think that it's a better utilization of funds because it's going directly to scale and being based off proven results. How intermediaries make that model work, I know there's a lot of them on this call that are very prepared and doing very similar work to us. And I just think that for a long time now, Cody and I have been thinking this is a model that works. And I'm going to turn it over to him to talk more about exactly how this is played out from the state of Arkansas perspective. But in setting the context, I just want everybody on this call to know that I also spent a lot of time in industry, right? And so I know what it looks like when people come to me with flavor of the month programs. But when you come to me with an incentive and a plan and you show me a way that we can collaborate to meet my needs, then all of a sudden, you got my attention. So, Cody, I'm going to let you take it from there because you're the one making this happen.
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. Appreciate it. Zach, AFA, appreciate the opportunity today. And as Lonnie mentioned, real quick, just kind of a quick point of clarification. So, Office of Skills Development is a division within Workforce Connections. I'm actually the executive director of Workforce Connections, or Workforce Services, more formally known, which is within the Department of Commerce here at Arkansas. But as Lonnie mentioned, I mean, we've for a number of years been working towards how do we expand apprenticeships here in the state of Arkansas, and that's only begun to increase more so even under Governor Sanders, as we've really been rolling out strategies to help increase those areas in all sectors, right? Not just construction trades where, we have thousands upon thousands of apprentices here in the state due to licensing and things of that nature. But, as Lonnie somewhat articulated, we started out in this Arkansas Center for Data Science world where we were really focused on the expansion of IT occupations. And, I'll butcher the numbers. Lonnie knows them much better than I do as it relates to the number of companies, the number of apprentices, and the number of organizations we were able to engage with. But we saw a drastic increase in a really relatively short period of time, as we ended up partnering with ACDS formerly and now more broadly known as Apprenticely. And so it was a couple of years ago, as Lonnie mentioned, we were sitting in this phase of, well, it's worked in IT, and we really don't have an organization playing a role such as this within manufacturing, within energy, within healthcare. And so Apprenticely has really stepped up over the last couple of years through some grant funds from us and through some philanthropic funds and other federal funds that they've been able to obtain themselves, which is always part of the mission, to really help us expand that effort. So, kudos to them and the partnership. And as Lonnie mentioned, it all started as part of a blue ribbon commission report, right, Lonnie? Way back when, we make be more economic competitive in data analytics in that space. So, but more broadly speaking, I guess as it relates to the American Manufacturing Apprenticeship Incentive Fund, which Zach is a mouthful when you say it out loud, right? But sometimes you got to call things what you can call them. But we launched it yesterday. We did a soft launch in December, and the amount of interest and awareness that has been provided since that soft launch, and even more so as of yesterday, I got to tell you, the excitement here is high. I know it's shared at the U.S. Department of Labor, and shout out to USDOL and their team and the close work that we've been doing together over the last few months and really getting this ready to launch. I think over the last few weeks, we've had conversations with so many states from Oregon, Montana, Washington, Ohio, Virginia, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and what's interesting is it's not just state agencies, right? And it's not just registered apprenticeship program sponsors who are trying to understand this. It's chambers of commerce, it's obviously businesses, it's economic developers, it's site selectors. And so there's been just a broad array of organizations who have reached out to us. Number one, wanting to participate and find out how they can have access to the incentive fund. But number two, really just wanting to learn more about what the model looks like. And to Lonnie's plan, or to Lonnie's comments, right, it's the plan. It's not a flavor of the month. It's how do you leverage these funds in accordance with whatever state funds may be available, what other funds that may be out there that can help really leverage this incentive to maximize it to the fullest extent. Here at the state of Arkansas, we put a few $1 million on an annual basis into registered apprenticeship, both on the construction trade side and on the broader expansion efforts. And so for this incentive fund, right, it's really an effort to help support them like we're doing already with the related technical instruction and training costs, but also as an incentive to perhaps instead of doing 2 or 3 apprentices, we're going to do 4 or 5, or maybe it's 6 or whatever the numbers end up being. So, that's kind of, what we've been seeing recently as it relates to the apprenticeship incentive fund itself. If you're eligible, right, you have to be a business or a registered apprenticeship program sponsor who either A, runs your own program, or B, acts as an intermediary or a consortia type model. There's an application process that's live today on the arkansasosd.com/MFG fund. Anybody who's on this call who isn't familiar with that site, we can probably link it in the chat here. Somebody can do that. But, that's where all the information is housed. There's some frequently asked questions, the list of the occupations that are out there, kind of the process for applying, and the actual link to apply are all live and on that website as of yesterday. And again, we've seen a number of different applications across a number of occupations. And I think one of the things that I want to bring up is, that 120 occupations list is really a starting point for us. I think there's probably some interest, and we've already had some requests just as of yesterday around, well, this occupation isn't on the list. Is there a process by which we can, request that it be added and things of that nature? And certainly that's going to be a part of this, right? We had to start somewhere. And so between us and Department of Labor, we took some effort and some time to really identify where we wanted to begin, whittle the list down, and knowing that we may have to grow out of that, but we had to start somewhere. So 120 occupations really covers a wide array of different occupations within the manufacturing sector. As it relates to the actual fund itself, I'm sure most everybody on this call probably knows, but if not, right, once you've applied for the fund through the Office of Skills Development website and you've met all the eligibility criteria, right, you're a registered apprenticeship program sponsor, you've identified kind of who the companies are if you're a consortia type model, what type of employment do you have in terms of the numbers of employees you have, because we want to track small business, medium business, large companies who are requesting this fund. And again, we've already seen many requests from small, medium-sized businesses, and we've had some pretty large organizations reach out to us as well. So we're seeing a good kind of disparity of size of companies that are requesting this, as well as the number of apprentices. It's really interesting. Some of the companies who have asked for, hundreds of apprentices already, and those that are looking at just 2 or 3 or 5 or 6, right? And so, the reason we're kind of operating it this way, and for the first 6 months, it's really a pilot phase for us. So we've put some limitations, at least over the next 6 months, in terms of how many apprentices an organization can have by employer, how many employers a sponsor can work with, and we can dive into those details. But we wanted to make sure that these large companies who certainly have a role to play in this don't take 75, 85, 90% of the money and then and have all those funds committed, and we don't have any funds remaining for some of our small and medium-sized businesses from across the country. So, we're really focused on making sure that all 50 states and obviously the territories have access to these funds. Our marketing efforts will reflect that. We're going to be, I just signed off on some toolkits and some marketing materials just this morning that'll be starting to get distributed out through multiple channels, through organizations like AFA and others. We appreciate Zach and the team there for helping us do some of this. But once you've applied for that and you've met those criteria, you put that information in there, what occupations you're looking for. Our team will receive that. We'll be in contact with those companies or sponsors within the next probably 1 to 2 weeks, and really have a more in-depth discussion of timeframes and things of that nature as it relates to the actual rollout and the implementation of the apprenticeship program. One point that people sometimes forget is, you can't retroactively go back and add apprentices that were registered prior to the launch date. But for any apprentices that are added, after the submission of the application, certainly would be eligible for that. So our team would work with you all to draft an MOU to outline the details of the agreement. And the one big piece of this, right, is that we wanted the funds primarily to go to companies. That was something that we were very passionate about. DLL was supportive of. And so, 90% of the funds, up to 90% of the funds will be going towards employers, with up to 10% going towards program sponsors of consortia type models and things like that. So, those are just a few comments that I had to kick this thing off with. One other thing I would just mention is, our agency here, at Workforce Connections and more specifically the Office of Skills Development, which is the division, they manage probably roughly $50-60 million worth of state funds on an annual basis with a staff of 12. And so for us, it's really, trying to prove that you can always do more with less. So our goal, as it relates to this, is really keep our administrative costs at a minimum. Certainly want to make sure that we let the market drive demand as it relates to some of how we structure ourselves internally with personnel and things of that nature. But we really want to make sure that through this funding, it finds the employers and the sponsors around the state that are around the country that are really doing this work on a daily basis. So, Zach, I'll pause there and we can go from here.
No, I think we're good. We can just wrap it up. You've explained everything. No, this is great. No, it's a great explanation, and it just like clears up a lot for me, like in understanding how you all got here, where you go to the website. We put a link that website in the chat. Um, but I have to say, like, I hate to get negative at the beginning, but we were curious in the apprenticeship field, like what was the Department of Labor thinking about this pot of funds and why did it go to Arkansas? And then how does that fit in with more of a national strategy? Can you kind of help us understand the thinking through and how this is all getting organized in terms of a more of a national strategy. If you can kind of open up the window for us to
Yeah,
understand.
I'll speak a little bit about, just us in Arkansas. I'm not going to speak for DOL. I hope you guys can understand that, right? I mean, I think they have their own approach as to how they're going to do things and how they're structuring the funding and things of that nature as it relates to the manufacturing incentive fund, and then the most recent announcements of some of the other grant funds, right? But for us here in Arkansas, I mean, I think it's a few things. Number one, we've been going down this expansion road within manufacturing for quite some time, right? It's an economic and workforce development priority of ours, like it is for many states, right? I don't know of one state that probably doesn't have manufacturing as an economic development priority, which obviously drives our workforce priorities. And so when you look over the time at our state apprenticeship expansion fund grants and what we've always focused on there, the message that we've sent throughout career and technical education, some of the things that we're doing through Governor Sanders and the workforce strategy, the fact that we've been doing some pay for performance models over the last few years, both through Apprenticely and through other means. Again, like Office of Skills Development grants out $23 million of discretionary funds on an annual basis, right? Just for incumbent worker trainings, apprenticeships, and things of that nature. And so some of that sure is like reimbursement type stuff and based on training, but a lot of it too is really some pay for performance type models. So we have experience in that world, and we're certainly not shy of that. And I think too, right, is like we've done a really good job, and it's because of organizations like Apprenticely of expanding apprenticeships in the state of Arkansas. And I think there's a belief that if we can do it with how we're structured today, here at the state level with a staff size of what we have, managing north of $50-60 million, for us, managing $38.5 million really isn't that big of a lift over the course of the next 4 years, and being able to do so with very low admin and overhead. I think that kind of speaks volumes a little bit to just our ability. And I think organizations, whether it's through the NGAs and the NASWAs and certainly AFA and some other organizations in which we work with, if you talk to Arkansas or you've been spending any time with us, I would argue that probably many of you have probably heard of or met Robert Magoo. If you haven't, he's the guy behind all the data systems and Arkansas Launch here in the state of Arkansas. And we're privileged to have him. But what we're doing with AI and some of our job platforms with Arkansas Launch and Career Tech Ed and our own state workforce Pell with the passing of Access Bill this last year, all of these things really try to, what I think is that they've really sent a message across, kind of not just the state of Arkansas, but across the country that, we really have a workforce development ecosystem here. And so our ability to really deliver on the strategy that DOL is putting forth, is something that we're able to step up to. Obviously, our workforce strategy and that of, the America's Talent Strategy for the Golden Age have some similarities and some alignment there. And so I think when you put all that together, those are a few reasons about why Arkansas was well situated to do this. We're not the only cooperative agreement out there, right? I mean, I think others. But we were really excited to be a part of the manufacturing aspect of it. Again, number one, because it's a targeted industry for us. We pushed expansion in this area through not just organizations like Apprenticely, but through some of our 2-year and 4-year universities. University of Arkansas Fort Smith has a multi-craft apprenticeship program. ASU Newport has an industrial maintenance apprenticeship program. SAU Tech down in South Arkansas with the defense industry has an apprenticeship program there. And so, I think that we've done a lot of work just as it relates to kind of our own building interest and awareness and commitment amongst the employer community that we feel well situated to be able to handle this. The other thing I guess I would just say through my lens as it relates to the overall broader strategy is, I think it's really about like, how do we maximize funds, to the maximum benefit for employers, and just through my lens, historically, right, like in being an organization in the state who applies for these funds, Lonnie talked about his effort towards applying for grant funding and things of that nature and ABA and in the hub. And I was with Lonnie in DC whenever we were having some of those conversations. But it was somewhat difficult, right? Because you would spend a lot of time, effort, and resources in submitting those applications for discretionary grants, just to not get them, right? And so I think, number one, I applaud DOL for the formula funding that they put out to states, and I think every state that's a part of this call would probably echo that sentiment. I think as part of this, it's like I think we need to continue that state apprenticeship expansion formula funds. It helps us better prepare and better structure ourselves. But these incentive models, I don't know of a lot of states that do these type of incentive models. We've historically done work as it relates to reimbursement of training expenses or things of that nature. And so, again, I think everything they're doing in my lens, right, not speaking for them, but for myself and for DOL, I think it's really how do we maximize the number of dollars going towards employers versus perhaps technical assistance and consulting and things of that nature, right? And I always tell, some of our state apprenticeship agency peers, right? We're transitioning to a state apprenticeship agency from an OA state right now. We submitted our application in December. We met the deadline. Our legislation said you had to submit it by December 31. I think we submitted it December 30. So we went right up to the hour on that. But it's like we really are, in a lot of ways, technical assistants, right? Like we're in Rapids every day. We're dealing with companies. We're dealing with organizations. We're dealing with intermediaries, nonprofits. We're having these conversations with apprenticeship programs and companies. And so, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of DOL. I'll let them weigh in if somebody's on the call. I don't know if anybody is, but I think that's just a general overview of kind of how I see it through my lens of running a state agency, a state workforce agency, and obviously being more intimately involved with apprenticeship in my prior roles than perhaps today.
Super helpful. It helps clarify, kind of right place, right time. You all are familiar with the pay for success model. Lonnie, I'd love to get a sense from you on, from an intermediary perspective, this is different, right? It's a little different than your typical grant that you're going to put out where you're going to organize it the way that you would like to see it be organized. You're going to target a particular population or a particular industry. How are you positioning Apprenticely to be successful in this kind of pilot phase that Cody's laid out for us?
Well, I want to bridge off of really everything that Cody said. If you then take that to say, incentive funding, right? Incentive to who, right? It's certainly an incentive to those who are already sponsors, an incentive to manufacturers who get it, right? They see this as a nice opportunity for some additional funding. But I think the incentive we want to see is that it's going to get to more companies that have never done apprenticeships before, right? Because when you showed your AFA chart, I think that was Harry did this, and I know people on this call will remember, what are some of the avenues by which we're going to get to 1 million apprentices, right? And part of that is repeat business, right? Companies that have already experimented with apprenticeship and maybe they do another occupation. Maybe they do more of something than what they've done in the past. But I think where our real opportunity is, and we've been talking to hundreds of employers and now across the country, not just in Arkansas. And it's amazing to me still how many really do not understand Apprenticeship 101, that they would see this not as a flavor of the month program, right, but as a strategy for workforce. And Cody's exemplifying the fact that this is not just for new hires, right? This is for incumbent workers. This is for a company to look and say, how am I advancing my skill sets to meet the demands of today? And it's almost an advance and replace strategy that we've incorporated as part of our intermediary role. And I really believe that when the new company anywhere in the country looks at this incentive fund and says, how do I take advantage of that? This is now the time I want to get started. It is honestly going to be more cumbersome for somebody who's never done this. They're not already a sponsor to go through all of what they have to go through when in essence, if they turn to an intermediary, and it could be others on this call, or turn to us, it's going to be as simple as they get clear about what occupations, they see that list and maybe they add something to it. We help them figure out what that training standard is going to look like. And guess what? They sign an employer agreement, an Appendix D, to say they're the employer of record and we're their sponsor. And it's that simple. They're good to go because we've already taken care of all of the rest of those steps. And to me, when somebody's getting started, they don't need to be burdened with a lot of extra administrative overhead. They need to focus on the talent piece, right? The focus on skill building. And if they can stay focused on that, and an intermediary like Apprenticely can take those other things, project management, registration and tracking, training schedules, and even braiding funding off their plate, then guess what? Many of you on this call have heard me say this. Employers look at us and say, come on, that sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? What am I missing? Right. And so I think done well with a foundation that an intermediary sets themselves up for, and now you add to that ability to resource the operational side of what it takes to do this into an organization that can do it with leverage. I could draw you a picture and say the 250 plus companies in Arkansas, they could have all done their own, right? They would have hired somebody to project manage it, to handle all the registrations and do all these steps. And if you added up what they would have had to pay somebody and did it and multiplied it by 250, it wouldn't, our efficiency is just what it is, right? It is clearly the way that we're going to scale. And so, Cody, you've mentioned many times that it takes the financial arm to be able to motivate and incent, right? And to be able to support what is needed. Because guess what? Employers are still going to have to do what? They're hiring somebody that doesn't check every box. They're going to invest in those people. They're paying their wage. They're going to pay a mentor. They're going to invest in their future. And what we're doing is we're collaborating with them to say, we can do our part. And training providers who are going to get funded to deliver training are going to do their part. And Cody's there, and organizations like DOL and all the other funders say, how does this all fit together? And we're saying we've cracked that code. We can share that with an employer and show them how it's strategic. So how they would do this strategically, how are they going to do it financially with success programs like this, right? An incentive over and above the RTI reimbursement and over and above all the things that an intermediary can do for them. But then that's the key. If it's strategic and it's financially beneficial, what about operationally? They have to figure out how to make this work to where they successfully complete, that the people who started the apprenticeship, they're going to get, right, Cody? They're going to get the incentive after 90 days, right? And we're, as an intermediary, we're going to send them that check, almost sight unseen, no questions answered, right? You got an apprentice that made it 90 days. But what do we really care about? We care about completion, right? We care about the fact that they're going to have rigor in the fact that they learned something, they applied something, and they became the journeyman or the master. Because that's what the ongoing succession management plan is for a company. That's putting my business hat on, right? But from an intermediary point of view, we've cracked the code with employers, and Cody knows this because those are the conversations. We're not selling them something. We're asking them, where are you struggling, right? What do you need? And the ones that were maybe on the fence, and now all of a sudden they see this incentive program that Arkansas is the fiscal agent. They know how to distribute those funds effectively, but it's open to all of us intermediaries to be able to say, how do we get to that new employer that this might be the way that they get started? I hope that makes sense because that's how I see this all playing together.
I think that's a terrific point. And Cody, I'd like for you to kind of dive in from there just a little bit. In this, we've talked a lot about the intermediary model, kind of consortia. If you're set up today like an Apprenticely or a multi, employer group sponsor, you're probably really well aligned to have the systems in place to be able to participate, take advantage, support your employers. What about from a sense of like, I'm new to apprenticeship? Is this still like the type of fund you'd want to participate in? Do you need an intermediary to help you get started? Like how are you viewing like, hey, we just heard about apprenticeship, we heard about this incentive fund, we're excited to get started, but we just learned how to spell apprenticeship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. Number one, yeah, without question. I mean, this is certainly a fund and an incentive you would be a part of. And I think this, Zach, your question kind of ties into something I was thinking when Lonnie was talking, which is, what is it that we're incenting, right? We're incenting the employers to adopt a model that perhaps they hadn't before or to expand something that they're currently doing. And I think sometimes, it's interesting when you talk to different states, right? In Arkansas, we have very few like single employer sponsors, right? Most of ours are through an intermediary type model. Our construction trades are through intermediary type models with, the Arkansas Construction Education Foundation, the Association of Builders and Contractors, and organizations like that, right? But for us, like we don't really track and really put much weight on the number of program sponsors, right? Like for us, it's really truly about the number of employers and the number of apprentices that we have, and how do we grow that? Well, it's by incentivizing them. The other thing that Lonnie was talking about as it related to incumbents and new hires, yes, it's for incumbents, yes, it's for new hires, but it's also for individuals that perhaps were, an assembler, for example, who did an apprenticeship to become an operator and they completed that successfully. Well, hopefully that company now has said, well, you know what, we're incentivized by this. Let's create a operator to an industrial maintenance apprenticeship program, right? And so now we've added another layer and another pathway for an organization to build on that. So and I guess now to answer kind of the question that you really asked, which is, yeah, 100%. I mean, there's rarely a conversation that I have with an employer. I texted Lonnie last week, it was like, hey, I was in Springdale and had had a conversation with a company who's doing some amazing work and doing some acquisitions and some things of that nature. And, they're trying to figure out their workforce pipeline and what they described as apprenticeship, but it's not registered apprenticeship, right? And so,
Hmm.
for me to be able to go into a company here in the state of Arkansas, or for others to be able to go into businesses in other states who have similar organizations like an Apprenticely, I'm sure, and there's certainly the national organizations that operate in these intermediary type capacities to say, look, here's what apprenticeship is. Here's how you spell it, Zach, right? Here's what all that entails, with minimum requirements and standards and all those things, right? And when you lay it out to them, right, you can kind of see the eyes kind of like, okay, well, this seems like a lot. And then you follow it up with, but there's an organization that can do all of that on behalf of you, and really act as an intermediary between you and the U.S. Department of Labor and the registration agency or the state apprenticeship agency, whoever that may be, to really handle all the legwork for you and really reduce the barriers to adoption of apprenticeship. And I think that's why we've seen the expansion here in Arkansas in a lot of ways is because, our construction trades are always going to be high simply because of the licensing requirements. But when we started to really kind of, have Apprenticely or ACDS at the time act as an extension of our agency in a lot of ways, we really saw much more broader adoption and much more quicker implementation than it would have been if I would have had to have gone and hired 5, 6, 7, or 8 different staff members
Hmm.
to operate within my confines of a state government and how we all have to operate versus having an independent organization like an Apprenticely act on behalf of us. So, as we talk to companies, I think I was talking to somebody in the state of Illinois just the other day, right? And they were kind of in this world of, I think I know what apprenticeship is, but I'm not real sure. And so, what the message we send them is look, here's how the incentive fund works. Here's how this structure is. Here's all the pieces that you have to have in place. And to Lonnie's point, right, after 90 days of registration, Lonnie may not ask any questions and sign unseen, cut the check. We're going to have to ask some questions,
Well,
like
he,
stuff like that. I had to throw that in there, Lonnie.
yeah. Well, Cody, my intent with that is that, sometimes when grant money goes out, it's very prescriptive. It's very targeted, right? It's only for this or that. What I like that you've set up with the incentive is that's where most needed, right? It could be operational, it could be for wage, it could be for training, it could be for a stipend for a mentor, because a lot of companies getting started don't realize the power of mentorship in an apprenticeship, right? And we did that at Blue Cross. I'll just say that flat out, Zach. The first year and a half of that program, we felt like, it was failing because guess what? We had people assigned as mentors, but when push came to shove, they did their real job. They had production assignments and they didn't find time to be available to be a mentor. So we took it serious and created a guiding principle that knowledge sharing was a major form of contribution. And we built it into their performance objectives that said, if you're a mentor, 10% of your review is going to be how well are you doing that, right? Now, not every company has to do that, but I think it's that kind of acknowledgement of how important the mentor, the master, it's really, Cody, adopting the whole trades and construction model of a master electrician with an apprentice, right? I mean, that model is what we're saying can apply to all these other occupations in a manufacturing plant that's not only guaranteeing a higher level of productivity and success, but the retention. I can't even emphasize what our, sample size now has proven, much less what you have at AFA that says what is the results of an effective apprenticeship program in terms of loyalty and retention. So,
Right.
And real quick, just to kind of finish this thought was, we were talking to an organization in Illinois last week, and they were again, trying to. We think we know apprenticeship, we're not real sure, and so obviously we went through the details of the fund and the incentive and all that stuff. But we said, look, if you're not situated to where you can manage this and want to adopt this yourselves, right? We have an organization in Arkansas, that can help assist with that. But more importantly, reach out to your office in Illinois, the agency, the office that manages apprenticeships, whether that's an SAA or an OA state. Everybody has a point of contact, right? If you don't have somebody that give it your USDOL regional office and find an intermediary type consortium model within your state to work with, right? I mean, we're all for Apprenticely being able to step up where necessary, but these organizations exist with national level stuff, right? With state level stuff. And so it's really trying to inform them of all the different varieties and options that they have at their disposal, to help remove the barriers and really increase the speed in which apprenticeship gets adopted to try to meet these numbers that we're trying to hit.
Well, that I mean, it sort of begs the question though, if you get somebody in who is just, like brand new to apprenticeship, like the call you just talked about from Illinois. Are you able to provide technical assistance in your office? Are you referring them to their state offices? How are you kind of viewing that referral system work is it kind of needs dependent?
Yeah, I mean it is. It's very much needs dependent, but I mean, look, we're funded to do this work, and so we will provide technical assistance as it relates to general overviews and things of that nature. But at the same time, we have a relationship with all these states and NASTAD, right, National Association of State Territorial Apprenticeship Directors, along with all the SAA directors, the OA offices, and just my counterparts, across the regions and the states through NASWA and NGN, things like that, right? So for us, we want to be able to help any company, any organization from any state be able to kind of understand what it is we're doing. But we really want them to build relationships within their own states as well, right? And so, we've
Yeah.
committed to, my counterparts at the state workforce agency level, to the NASTAD team and the state apprenticeship agency directors and others, like, we're not going to try to replace you all as it relates to this. We're going to provide assistance and information as it relates to the fund. But we really want those state agencies or other organizations in which they're working with in their own states to build that relationship, have that relationship, and us to be able to work with them collectively. A good example of that, right, was in Montana. We had an organization in Montana reach out to us, right? So I immediately, reached out to Glenn Disk in Montana. I was like, hey, had a phone call or email with this organization. Just wanted to keep you aware and informed of this. Same situation has happened with David Polk in Wisconsin and other states. Oklahoma reached out to my counterpart, Trey Rahill, and one of the things that we're wanting to do is as these applications roll in and as we approve funds at some normal cadence, whether that's monthly or quarterly or however that's going to look, we're going to provide a report back to all the states that says, here's the activity that's happening in your states. We want you to be aware of it. We want you to know about these companies or these organizations who are requesting these funds so that you can build relationships with them, right? Because I know from my lens, if another state was administering this fund and they were Apprenticely was working on behalf of 5, 10, 15, 20 different companies, I would want to know or at least have some visibility into what that looks like in my state. So that perhaps I may not know who this company is, or I may not have a relationship with that organization. And so, as much as we want to provide technical assistance to them, which we will to a certain level, we want a lot of that to happen at the state level too, or at the USDOL regional office, whatever the best situation is for that organization in that state.
That's super helpful, right? From like an information sharing perspective, knowing a lot of state directors, they want to know what's happening in their state. They want to know what intermediaries are operating. They want to, I mean, for performance requirements too. You want to be able to count as many apprentices at the end of the day for grants and for reporting to the governor, et cetera. Lonnie, I want to ask you just a little bit of a different question though, because this fund it's it's different, right? I mean, it's like most of the funding of that $3,500 is going to go to the employer, and it's a smaller portion that's going to go to the intermediary. Intermediaries can offer a range of different activities and offerings to employers, where that's related instruction, doing data work, administering the program, coaching. Is this fun for like every intermediary? Are intermediaries really going to have to think about like what is the what is the outcome I really want to get to? And does this fund really meet, what I need to deliver in terms of a high quality apprenticeship, making sure that those apprentices complete and they have the supports that they need? What do you think?
Great question. We think about this a lot, and this is not something that, as a nonprofit organization, we think about in a vacuum, because certainly Cody's been involved in some of these conversations, and so has other national partners of ours, like SOFL and others, right? So if you think about replicating a state model, right, and you say, what is it that we've been able to do that we could pick up and move it to Missouri or Wisconsin or Montana or whatever? There's some components of this that are going to be, we're asking the same questions in each case about what's the employer engagement, right? How do you go about doing that? How are you reaching an audience of who's going to be the supply of talent? And then you've got all those pieces in the middle that become administrative, they become training partners, and that costs money, right? To be able to do that efficiently. And I think we've cracked that code on what that looks like. And is a 10% pay for performance enough to justify everything that it takes? I think Cody and I, we're both going to agree. No, in and of itself and by itself, even if we did, sponsored 1,000 of these, right? We can tell you what we put in yesterday in the first submission, right? And what that looks like and what other national intermediaries are going to want to do. And even at 1,000, right? At basically $350 per, that $350,000 may not sustain an organization all by itself on its own. That's just not enough, right? On the kind of scale we're talking about. So AFA, Zach, you could probably share your presentation that said, what did your data show others that says, what is a complementary model of this incentive to employers, or maybe it's reimbursement for RTI, and then what's the operational cost that generally organizations that have done it well, right? So like
Right.
closing the skills gap grant, we evaluated all 46 or however many there were of the grantees. And there were a handful that met their goals, used their money effectively, and delivered thousands of apprenticeships, as opposed to those that maybe didn't quite meet their goals. This is a way, as Cody said earlier, you're only paying for something that's already proven. It's been done, right? But it does take an organization that can scale, and we do have to come up with the right level. If it's only going to come from one source, does it all have to come
That's
from a
right.
federal grant? Or can it be the same model coming with the kind of support we get from OSD in our own state? Well, what's that model look like? And I've done this already. We've got companies that we started in Arkansas and they said, you know what? We're in every state, or we got plants in 3 locations, or we're in 10 locations. So what we've done is Softwell's helped us. We go talk to those state offices, Cody, like you said, and find out what can we do to braid federal, your state money, and any private money to be able to create a model that can execute in the same way. Because we can register them anywhere, right? But the state may say, no, we need to register them here because we're going to use this funding, formula funding. We're going to use ABA2. We're going to use, whatever grant they received. But if you can see the model that we're talking about on pay for performance, if
Yeah.
that becomes a viable strategy at the right amount, and I'm not saying it has to cover it all, I'm
Mhm.
not saying 10% won't be something that Cody's data isn't going to prove out one way or another as to whether that's the right amount or it needs to be a little different or whatever. But I think the point being is that we don't want to diminish the focus of an employer staying on the right things and somebody else in this ecosystem taking on the administrative things because we know how to do it. So let's do that. It's the way to scale to meet 1 million apprentices. So that's kind of my take on, are we at the right point yet on the pay for success percentage? I think we got to learn. I think we got to
Yeah.
take some data. I think we got to
This is going
scout
to
the
be an
place.
experiment for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you agree,
Cody,
Cody? I mean,
I'm gonna.
I want to see what Cody's thought is in terms of whether we know exactly what the right percentage is or whether we'll learn.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think, I don't think, and here's what I would say to that, right, is, I don't believe that, the funding, right, and I'll just be honest, right, like to begin with, my interpretation when we were having these conversations as it relates to how the funding was going to be structured was 100% of it to go to employers, right? So nobody cast any stones or throw any arrows at me. But, I mean, and I think that's really the genesis behind this is that our lens here at the state level and how we operate our stuff is how do we incentivize the employer, right? We didn't look at this, as how do we, support or stand up or provide funds to the intermediary, so to speak, knowing that you all make, I mean, you play a huge role and probably a massive role, really is probably a better way to say it, in the broader adoption and technical assistance and things that are being done through this incentive fund. But we really wanted to target, right, that those employers and maximizing the amount of dollars going to the organizations that are employing the apprentices and making those investments and let them reap the benefits of that primarily, right? So there's some
Mhm.
conversations with USDOL and our own team here, right? We landed on that 10% because, when we do some of our own grants here at the state level, we cap administrative costs at 10%. And
Yeah.
so, for us, that was kind of the metric that we wanted to stand by as it related to that. Now, to your point, though, and I think it's very valid, is, what will the data tell us? How will we see that? How many, are there industry intermediaries that aren't going to participate because there's only a 10%, admin fee or a piece of the $3,500 that's going to come to them for every apprentice they manage? I don't think so. You guys can tell me whether or not that's going to happen or not. But I think too is like intermediaries that currently exist have these relationships already And there's either grant funding or there's private relationships with these employers where they're paying a fee to the organization to help support the work that you do. And so I think for us, right, we looked at it and said, well, while there's 10% really is going to be set aside for the intermediary to do the work that they're going to do, that doesn't mean that private employers or these organizations can't have other agreements in place where they're paying for services being provided through these organizations. So, those are just a few of the, comments I have as it relates to that, Lonnie. But I do think to the point you and Zach both made, which is, we have to look at the data after this rolls out, and especially
right.
after this first 6 months, and see what we see. And then over the course of the next year or two, and obviously 4 years through the lifetime of the grant, we'll be able to draw some kind of parallels and some comparisons to see kind of how this stacked up, what worked well, what could be improved, and then how does USDOL manage that data moving forward with any investments they may make in the future.
Super helpful. I want to move into, I see we have some great questions in the chat. My friend Brent Weil asked one that I wanted to ask, which is about the occupation. So, taking a look at what occupations are eligible. So he says, for example, the two-digit families 15, 17, 49 cover the vast majority of occupations that would seem to take some of the guesswork out of applying. And I guess his question is like, what is in scope here in terms of occupations? Manufacturing is going to be, you think welders and mechatronics techs and IMTs, these sorts of occupations. But Cody, it sounds like you all have scoped a little bit bigger too. Can you get to that? And then while you're answering, folks, please raise your hand and come off mute if you have a question for Cody or Lonnie.
Yeah, and look, I'll be the first one to tell you I'm not the expert when it comes to this aspect of it on the occupation level. That's why I have Stephanie and Derek on the team that really focus on a lot of this stuff, but as well as USDOL. But I mean, really, we know that there's going to be additions to this list more than likely, right? And just yesterday, right, we received some requests of occupations that weren't included in that 120. And so we're going to look at over the next 6 months, right, like what occupations do we consistently receive informations or questions about that we can relay and have conversations with USD on as it relates to, hey, these really do feel like they fit the manufacturing scope, but they're not within our 120 list. So how do we want to handle that? How do we want to manage that? We want to approve a new set of occupations at a given time, right? So perhaps in 3 months, maybe we look at some data as it relates to occupations that weren't originally on the list and add those at a given period of time. Or do we wait for the full pilot phase to end and go about it that way? Do we do it as a one-off basis? So I mean, I think there was a lot of work that was done on the USDOL side as it related to some of the codes, ONET, Rapids codes, and things of that nature as related to the 120 occupations. But we definitely had a pretty big list of those, and we whittled that down somewhat to really focus on what's happening at a plant level, not so much a front office aspect of it. And it's like, there's questions about, well, are you an IT company or are you a manufacturing company, right? And so like, what do we do with occupations that fall in that scope? Do you maintain machinery or heavy equipment machinery, right? That isn't necessarily used in manufacturing, but perhaps you're a company that manufactures these things. So there's a number of different things there. And I know that doesn't directly doesn't directly answer the question that was asked, but all I could say to, I think it was Brent maybe is, let's talk about any occupations that perhaps aren't on the list. And that way we can discuss that internally as well as the USDOL to see if we can add those at the right time.
All right, we have a bunch of shy folks not wanting to come offline and raise their hand. So I'm going to ask another question in the chat until someone wants to raise a hand. But Amy Stage, she asked, can apprentices be co-enrolled with the current ABA grants?
Cody, I asked that question because Zach and I discussed it. So Amy, thanks for asking it. Didn't we already get that clarification that based on the fact that the source of these funds is not going to cause a co-enrollment because this incentive fund is new monies? Is that true?
I would say, and apologies that I'm not going to answer it directly, but I would like to just confer with USDOL on that. I know we've had some conversations as it relates to like the state apprenticeship expansion formula funds, and we've gotten some answers as it relates to that. And I believe the answer is yes, we would be able to leverage both the expansion formula funds and the incentive fund. But as it relates specifically to ABA grants, I haven't had that conversation. So I would probably say, Amy, let's follow up, you and me, perhaps you could get my email address after this, shoot me a note. And then once I work with USDOL and just ask that question directly, I can provide you a better answer. And Zach, I can share that with you as well once I get that information, and we can set.
And Zach, I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but can I give some input on that?
Go
Hi.
for it.
So as a USDOL funded intermediary, we were provided with a USDOL document on co-enrollment. So there is a co-enrollment document, frequently asked question document for this. And the bottom line, it pretty much says, that from the same funding stream, there may be an issue, but from different funding streams as it relates, to where the funding is coming from. No. So we ourselves would not see this as any conflict, but I do agree that being specific is probably important. So sorry, I couldn't find my hand raising thing, Jack.
No, that's great. It's a good question to ask. As an intermediary before, we were navigating some of those questions in different rounds, and the answer changes, right? So you've got a new administration here. They may have a different answer than what's been put on paper than the previous Biden administration. So, Cody, great question to follow up with your FPO on, and we can certainly share the response through our membership as well. Um, Anyone else want to come offline and ask a question? And then we're getting right up to the end, but I did want to just sort of get a sense of like, on new occupations. Do you all see like there being an opportunity for companies are looking to get started in a new occupation to get engaged in this fund or do they really need to have an apprenticeship program already in place and then be expanding to a new occupation? How would you help a company get started to like,
I mean, I
go
think
and
number
say
one,
an
if I'm
IMT role?
eligible to apply, right, there has to be a currently registered apprenticeship program, right? So,
Okay.
I mean, certainly if there are new organizations or new programs that are being created, and there's occupations associated with that, and it's perhaps not on our current list, right? We certainly want to take that under consideration and look at what that is, and if it fits great. But I mean, as it relates to just, the broader idea of it, I mean, if there are organizations that are trying to register new programs, we certainly want to accommodate to the fullest extent, because at the end of the day, our goal is to maximize the amount of incentive funds going out to employers to support the occupations that are currently approved. Lonnie, I
Yep.
saw your, so I'll stop so you can weigh in.
Well, we face this every day, Zach. I mean, the minute that we moved into the manufacturing space several years ago, and there's others on this call that can attest to this, as we engage employers, you know, different occupations or different titles exist for, in some ways, the standard same set of competencies. They're just called something different. And sometimes they're this close, and yet they think it's needing to be a whole new occupation. So we spend a lot of time aligning competencies to the occupation and their job description and how they're actually doing work. I would say that if at all possible, we tried not to have to go through the process of creating an entirely new DOL occupational standard. Doesn't mean we haven't done that in a few cases, but for the most part, I think you find something that's pretty doggone close. And that way they can get started, take advantage now of the incentive fund, make sure that those competencies are aligned to what they really need them to know, right? And that's been entirely successful. But in the case where you just can't, it is totally new, right?
Yeah.
It's an AI role that never had been defined before, kind of thing. Then yeah,
Well, this has just been great. We're at the top of the hour. I probably could ask you 10 more questions, tons of questions in the chat. Just encourage you all to contact us at AFA if you have a question you want to send on to Cody and Lonnie. Of course, there's the website that we put in the chat to be able to put in your application for the incentive fund. But just again, thank you all for joining. This has been super informative, super fun. I've had a blast. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Lonnie. Great to hang out with you all. And we'll see you all very soon for our next webinar.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
thanks everybody.